Onwards. Thank you, madam.
Pinaki Misra ji.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I need hardly state, Madam Chairperson, at the outset that I rise in support of this motion for the appointment of a joint parliamentary committee. Madam Chairperson, we heard the Leader of the House today introduce the motion. He gave a very statesman-like peroration. The Leader of the House said, Madam Chairperson, that
Please, आप सुनिए.
when the executive and the legislature abdicate their responsibility, there comes about a vacuum, and in that vacuum, you will find certain other powers, whether they are constitutional powers or extra-constitutional powers, which will attempt to fill the vacuum. In that context, he mentioned Maoism, Madam Chairperson, but I want to draw the attention of this House to something far more important. The other day, the newspapers, when this entire issue began in the Supreme Court, reported an observation by the judges of the court when Dr. Subramanian Swamy was addressing arguments. The Solicitor General of India was giving his arguments. The Solicitor General of India made bold to say that the Prime Minister is an honest man. Dr. Swamy endorsed that. And the Supreme Court, that's what the newspapers said, Madam Chairperson, sarcastically said, Mr. Solicitor General, we don't need you to give your Prime Minister a certificate of good conduct. The petitioner is giving the Prime Minister a certificate of good conduct. Now this, Madam Chairperson, I say, pains all of us, that an institution like the Prime Minister of this country is the object today of some derision, the object of some ridicule before another institution under the Constitution. And this reminds me, Madam Chairperson, of what happened in 1994, 95, 96, when another Prime Minister thought he was being too clever by half by implicating his cabinet colleagues in the Hawala scam. And similarly, there was a vacuum because the executive was emasculated, the legislature was emasculated, and therefore what filled in was the judiciary went rampant. And the Congress party, Madam Chairperson, took 8 years thereafter to recover and come back to power only in 2004. So I remind the Congress benches that when they have acceded to a JPC today, they've done the right thing, because there is an internal corrective mechanism that this House must bring in order that external corrective mechanisms do not kick in, do not come into play. It is best that we self-correct. Otherwise, there are enough forces in this Constitution as well as outside the Constitution who are only too willing and able to correct us. The government has been less than gracious, because I think the Honorable Leader of the House again today said he was being disingenuous when he said that we were ready for a JPC, we only wanted a debate. No, that's not correct. The winter session was a waste because the government dug its heels in and said no JPC. Now, Madam Chairperson, why a JPC? And I'll come to the point straight away. The reason for the JPC is the various contradictory theories that have been floated over the last 6 to 8 months. Many of them, Madam Chairperson, have actually now come from the Prime Minister, who from day one, I must say, has been less than convincing, because he's been less than convinced. He was never convinced of this position on day one, and therefore, unfortunately, he's been less than convincing. Look at the kind of theories that have come out. First, today the Prime Minister says there is the same policy, but there is a faulty implementation. The House is entitled to ask him, it was under your beat that this faulty implementation took place. Where were the people who were to ultimately decide that that implementation was to be corrected? It was under your beat. Today he again said that the same policy had the cabinet's imprimatur. But I wish to remind the Prime Minister, we have now seen the then Finance Minister has clearly made a noting that if these licenses are to be further sold out, there must be a premium that the government must obtain. The finance minister said this. Why was the finance minister's recommendation ignored? The Prime Minister talks about teledensity today, Madam Chairperson. Teledensity is because of the aspiration of 1 billion Indians. Teledensity has nothing to do with what price you pay. People who have paid humongous prices in the auctions for 3G have done so advisedly because they know what they will reap commercially. So therefore, let us not hide behind the fact that you have given teledensity to this country, because teledensity to this country to 1 billion people had to come, whether you are in power or they were in power. Madam Chairperson, the Prime Minister has talked about coalition compulsions. That because of coalition compulsions, he's had to tolerate rogues in his cabinet. But then in the same breath he says, but it was a cabinet decision. So therefore the entire cabinet comprises of rogues, with great respect. Madam Chairperson, he's talked about another theory that this was actually with the media barons when he gave his press interview. He said this is in the nature of a subsidy, like the food subsidy, like the fertilizer subsidy. But then that's an answer in itself. That's a complete answer. The government on day one should have said that we actually wanted to subsidize the whole thing and then let the people decide whether this is the kind of subsidy that this government has been voted to power to give people. I'm glad my friend Mr. Kapil Sibal has just walked in. Madam Chairperson, I was his junior in his chamber. I learnt a lot from him. But Mr. Sibal needs to learn a lot in turn himself from some of his leaders.
Thank you.
He has to learn from the manner in which the Congress the Congress president maintains her silence under the grimmest provocation, and how little the Prime Minister speaks despite being provoked. I don't know why the Prime Minister brought in Mr. Sibal.
Please wind up now.
Yes, Madam Chairperson. I don't know why the Prime Minister brought in Mr. Sibal. We were all under the impression that because he's a man of unimpeachable financial integrity, that he was brought in to kick in some corrective mechanisms into this system. Instead, Mr. Sibal on day one mounted a robust and combative defense of Mr. Raja, which would actually have done him credit if he was arguing for his bail in Patiala House. And really, if his heart is not in the job that he's got here, he really should resign and go and defend Mr. Raja in court. Because that is what he has done. That is what he has attempted to do. And Madam Chairperson, he is far too intelligent a person not to understand that he is in a minority of one in this country who believes in that so-called zero loss that he has given in this house. There is no question that he is a single man. I'll just take 2 minutes to wind up. Mr. Laluji, 2 minutes to wind up. Madam Chairperson, all I need to say now is, I'll just take 2 minutes.
Please.
I'll take 2 minutes, Madam Chairperson. There are two fundamental questions. This JPC. Madam, you gave a lot of time to.
I've given already.
You can give me 1 minute. Give me only 1 minute to sum up. Only 1 minute to sum up.
More than that. Okay, sum up.
1 minute. This JPC has to come at a very, very important finding. Because this is now what the newspapers write on a daily basis. When you say that the loneliness of the Prime Minister, etc., has the Congress party and the UPA taken advantage of a decent man of unimpeachable integrity whose currency now is unfortunately running out? The Congress has soaked his currency up and is now preparing to ditch him. That is one. Or is this Prime Minister, Madam Chairperson, with great respect, a worthy inheritor to Sri Narasimha Rao ji, who was very, very Machiavellian in his own ways and who loved the power that came with his job? When the Prime Minister said there should not be elections every 6 months, what he meant to say was, I didn't want to remain Prime Minister only for 6 months. That's what he said, and that's what this JPC must decide. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
धन्यवाद मैडम। मैं सरकार को भाई साहब बहुत प्रताड़ित होने के बाद कांग्रेस पार्टी ने, यूपीए गवर्नमेंट 2 ने सुप्रीमेसी ऑफ पार्लियामेंट को स्वीकार किया, जेपीसी बना के जो घोषणा किया, मैं इसका स्वागत करता हूँ। और मैंने शुरू में ही एक सुझाव दिया था कि जेपीसी आज ये कोई नई बात नहीं, जो अपोजिशन हुआ करता है, असेंबली का हो, पार्लियामेंट का हो, जहाँ भी, ऐसे महत्वपूर्ण बिंदुओं पर सरकार को ग्रिल करने के लिए, जानकारी के लिए, ये हमेशा मांग लोग करते हैं कि ज्वाइंट पार्लियामेंट्री या विधानसभा की कमेटी बनाइए, और हर सरकार उसे प्लान करती रही है, ये रिकॉर्ड है हर जगह का। लेकिन आज ये जो बात आई और घोषणा हुआ जेपीसी बनाने का 2G स्पेक्ट्रम के मामले में, और टर्म्स और कंडीशन जो तय है 3, इसमें 3 को गौर से देखा जाएगा तो